Alright guys, hopefully you're all done with your glue up portion of the project initially, where you've glued the front and the middle section together. Now that we've glued those two sections together, we need to get it ready to glue the back of the project on here. If you glue the back on at the beginning, what will happen is you can't clean up this connection right here to make this perfect with the sander. So we only glue the first two on so that we can come back to the spindle sander. I've already gone ahead and I have adjusted the spindle sander to be the largest spindle that I can fit comfortably inside this hole. That's going to be different for different projects depending on the size speaker hole you decided to go with. So when I turn on the spindle sander, the spindle is going to be rotating in this clockwise direction. So I need to make sure that my project, when I make surface contact with it, is rotating against that direction so that I don't have any issues with the actual project getting pulled out of my hand or being out of control at any time. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this on. I'm not going to use the dust collector. Normally I would, just for the sake of audio. I'm going to leave it off, but normally I would request that you guys come down here and press the shop vac button. I'll do that right now. Kind of here. That noise is not going to be present, so you'll see a little extra dust on the table. Let's go. Alright, so I have completely sanded the inside of this now till where these two surfaces that made up are now in the same plane exactly, just in case the holes were not drilled perfectly or there was some roughness from the drilling. That's all been sanded out, so this will look good when the back goes on here without me having to do much work to it. That's much faster to do it that way. The other thing you want to be cognizant of or aware of is you want to make sure that you don't make these holes no longer round. If you really focus on one area, you can put a dip in it. I can see that I need to sand this section a little bit more. I was avoiding it because there was nothing there to mate up, but I'm going to go back and just hit it a little bit to keep the roundness overall. So really make sure you're working in a circular direction around the whole circle evenly with light pressure until everything looks good. That way you don't ruin the circular shape of the speaker itself. Let me clean that up real quick and then we'll move on. That looks good. So we're going to go ahead and go back over to the glue up process where I'm going to try and level or even out everything on the bottom and the sides. We'll glue this particular project up and then I'll go ahead and put some nails in this. By putting nails in it, what I can do is the nails will hold it while everything's drying so that I can kind of work on the next few steps and move forward a little bit quicker. Some of you guys that were watching this may be at the end of a semester or at the end of a particular grading period in one of my classes, and if you need to speed up the process, that's a little trick that I'll show you guys. If not, you don't have to do that step. You can just glue it up, let it sit overnight, or at least for 2 hours, so the glue really sets up. Then we're going to clean up the ends and everything and sand them so that all the faces look good. Take it to the router table, round everything over so it feels good in the hand and it can't splinter, and then we're pretty much ready for finish. Maybe a little bit of finish sanding, we'll see what the condition looks like. Let's go do it. All right, we're ready for some glue up. So in order to do this, I'm gonna add these tools to it, which you don't need to have, but we need to have obviously the pieces that we're gluing together. I have a wet towel that I got wet and then I wrung it out so it's not dripping wet. It's just moist, so it's easy for glue cleanup. I have at least a couple of clamps, and these are some larger clamps than I used last time, some large squeeze clamps, and then I have some glue. So what I want to do is verify the direction that I want to glue this together first so that it's going to look good. I've got a dent in this thing, and I want to put that dent on the bottom just so this is going to look better when it's done. So I'm going to put it together like that. Let's take this glue, and again, I'm only going to apply the glue to the piece that's got all the cutouts on it because it knows exactly where it needs glue. If we put glue all over this other back piece, then we'll have a bunch of glue that we don't need and have a big mess to clean up. I'm going to use my finger to just spread this out, make sure that this wood surface is completely coated. We just need a thin coat over the whole surface. We don't want to leave any bare spots or dry spots without glue on them. All right. So it's really easy to over apply the glue. You do not want to use too much glue. You just need a thin coat. This is actually probably a little bit heavy on the glue side. So I'm going to have a bit of cleanup to do with my rag here. I'm going to go ahead and put these together. And then while doing this, I'm going to try to make sure that they stay in alignment. When I put the clamps on, I need to make sure that the clamp is not held in an extreme angle one way or the other, because it'll actually take all the boards and it'll shift the pieces. So I need to put the clamp on so that it is square to the project as best I possibly can while it's evened out, and I'm holding everything down tight to the table. Oh, I can see I didn't quite get it square. You can watch it. It'll start to move on you if it's not quite right. So okay, so that's a good starting point, and I'm just going to let that sit for a second. What I'm doing is I'm just letting the squeeze out occur. And if you were just going to glue up today, I would say wipe all the glue off like this and then put this in your bucket. I'm going to do an expedited method with some finished nails on the back side of my project. You may not want the look of finished nails, I totally understand. It's definitely not as clean of a look, but for the sake of this video and getting this done, I'm going to speed this up. So what I'm going to do, now that the glue has been pushed, the air has been pushed out of the joint and the glue is spread out, I'm going to take one clamp off. And what I'm going to do, let's just wipe this table so I don't get glue everywhere. I'm going to wipe this excess glue off from right here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this down on the table in a way that the clamp is hanging off the edge and my project is flat against the table, okay? And then I'm going to double check that the screws will not go into the holes here. I can see I have about 3/8 of an inch in either direction I can go. So I'm going to come in right there, and if I drive this nail straight in, I should be okay. Okay, let's do this other side here. So once you get down to the surface, you don't want to smack the hammer tight against the surface, because what you'll do is you'll put a big hammer dent in the surface. You can either grab a nail set or another nail, okay, and just lightly tap that in there. The nail's a little bit flimsy to do that. Ideally, you're going to use a nail set. I'll show you that. Backside of our tool cabinet, you want to grab a nail set that's got a fairly small tip to it. Okay, I'm going to hold it right over the nail, give it one tap so it's just below the surface. This is just so if I go back later and I put a little bit of putty on here, I can completely hide that nail. Now I'm going to take this other clamp off, and I can do the same thing to this other side. If you're any closer to the edge, I'm about a 1/2 inch away from the edge, 3/8 to 1/2 inch. You want to tap the tip of the nail first and flatten it out so it's more likely to crush the fibers and less likely to split. That's a good old school trick. Make sure that we're clean here before we sink it. So I can still easily pull this nail out while it's sticking out about 1/8 of an inch. Make sure it's going where you want it before you drive it home. And then I'm just going to set that flat. Again, I'm going to take this nail set, just tap these in below the surface. Okay, so now I need to just wipe all the squeeze out off of this project from everywhere else so that I can go and work with it at the sander, the router, whatever. Now, I was very careful to make sure when choosing my nail placement that when I round over my edges, I'm doing a really small round over, these nails will never touch any of the metal bits. You do not want to cut a metal nail with one of our router bits. The carbide teeth will get damaged and cause potentially some shrapnel. It could be dangerous. So try not to do that. Now I have this little combination square here. I'm gonna use the ruler itself because it has a nice sharp corner to help me do my cleanup. Just make sure you clean the ruler really good. You don't want to leave any glue on the ruler either. I'm gonna take this towel and use the ruler to help get this nice and clean. Looks pretty good in there. There's a lot of glue here. So let's start with a clean scraper. We don't want to wipe that glue everywhere. We want to get it out. So I'm using the corner to just kind of scrape it out and then getting the excess off. I'll fold it inside this towel and then we'll go back with any residue that's left over and we'll wipe it out. Yeah, that looks pretty good. Okay, so I want to get that done as far as I can see. There's an area back in there that I won't be able to reach, and that's absolutely fine. It doesn't have to be perfect, but you know, if you can get the visual area nice and cleaned up, your project's going to turn out much nicer. So that looks like it's all cleaned up. Now there's a couple things I need to do. We need to, before we round over all the edges and these holes and whatnot, we need to square this thing up. This edge is not perfectly flat on either side, so I want to square this up. I can either do that at the miter saw, or I can do that with a disc sander or something like that, but the miter saw is going to give you a perfect edge. So I'm going to actually take this thing over to the miter saw. We'll go make a quick cut over there. After we go to the miter saw, we will take a quick trip over to the sander. We'll just lightly hit all these faces. This edge is a little bit weathered, and we'll clean all these edges up, make sure all these seams look perfect, and then we'll take it over to the router table and we'll introduce that one last tool before we call it quits. Let's go do it. Alright, so it's time to cut our piece of wood using the miter saw here. We're just going to square things up, so I'm just going to push the material. If you look right here, you can see this end is not perfectly even everywhere. These pieces were a little bit, it slid a little bit when I was gluing them together, and that's fine. And a lot of this was scrap wood that I was using to demonstrate this. So I left you guys the nicer material out there. I just want to cut off enough to clean this whole thing up, to basically take the shortest part of the side of the project and to barely touch it, and then the rest of the pieces will get a little bit of a cut, squaring everything up. Let's go do it. Don't forget to wear your safety glasses when working with the saw. So I took off such a small amount, there really wasn't even scrap wood to take off the saw. It was just all turned into dust. So you can see the difference is now the edge looks nice and clean. Everything is nice and even and flat. That'll sand really fast. It'll look good. The other thing I want to check now is I want to check to make sure this reveal is the same. So I do have a little less material here than I do here. That means I had to cut a little more here, so I will take a little bit more off of this one just to even those up visually so the project looks sweet. That's nice. Okay, so let's take this over to the sander, the edge sander. We'll just flatten out the bottom and the top the same way, cleaning everything up till it's just barely touching the shortest portion, and then we'll be ready to take this to the router table. All right, guys, so this is the edge sander. What we need to do here is we need to make sure that when we're pushing against the belt, we are not going to endanger our fingers in any way. So what I want to do is not push with my whole hand, okay? I want to try and actually place my palms on the table and push with just my fingers, so that I'm actually not putting body force in there, just finger force, and I can control with my hand indexed against the table, just like we write with a pencil. For really accurate penmanship, we want to do the same kind of thing here with this piece of wood. Having a finger against the back of this belt's going to rotate in this direction. And when the wood comes in contact with it, it's going to want to pull this down that way. So we're going to need to put resistance in the other direction in order to make sure we have good control over this. Now we're really fortunate actually, we have the holes here. We can put our fingers in here as well and get a really good solid grip of this thing to make sure it doesn't go flying. But just be aware and be ready for that pull from the machine to try and take this thing out of your hand. We've got to overcome that. And we want to just lightly sand and then pull this away. We do not want to create a lot of friction. We don't want this to heat up, excuse me, and create friction and burn the wood. All right. Again, if you're using this machine during class time, make sure you open the dust gate. I'm going to forego the dust gate right now just for the sake of audio because it will blow the audio out. Gotta let it cool off just a little bit. That's all we're looking for. We just want the whole bottom to be nice and even. Now I'm going to do the same thing to the top. Alright, so normally if the dust collector is running, which I left off for the sake of the video, this wouldn't accumulate, but we've got all this dust here because of the noise that I tried to avoid for the camera. Anyway, that's it. This top is nice and even now. These sides are even. Everything should be pretty much square. If you want, you can go ahead and clean up the back or the face as well. I'm going to do that and get the marks off of my project by doing the exact same thing, just real light pressure. Making sure I hold on to it safely, and then we'll go over to the router table.